Hello and welcome to episode 133 of MMO Weekly, presented as always by Chitty's Cheesesteaks. I'm your host, Sal Manzo, joined again by John Luke Shapiro. John Luke, thanks for coming on, man. I know we spoke a few days ago. We were talking previewing WBC stuff, and man, what is a few days it's been with that. Italy is now the baseball capital of the world. That's just what happened. And, obviously, a lot of blunders as far as with the U.S. goes. We know what happened with their manager. We'll get into all that. But besides the drama with the U.S., just tremendous games. Dominican Republic, Juan Soto's hitting home runs. That's been electric. It's just been a really, really tremendous tournament so far.
Yeah, I mean, you can't deny that this tournament is capturing pretty much every single audience you can, except for the United States team, which is probably, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but they're probably as interesting as, stale bread, from all the things considered relative to Team Puerto Rico and Team Italy and Team Dominican Republic and Team Venezuela and even Team Canada. I mean, but it's been a phenomenal tournament. All the teams have just been, great. Even Team USA, of course, I still have to give them their props. They're still a very talented team, as much as I want to, rip them a little bit, but that's okay, But it's been such a fun tournament. You look at the, at least on the first couple of games, Dorel Hernaiz, his walk-off home run to, put Puerto Rico up their second win rather of the tournament, which I thought was, amazing. Being a, Puerto Rican, that was absolutely phenomenal. You look at the Team Czech Republic, with the whose name is escaping me, and I apologize, but the pitcher who pitched 4 innings, who was the electrician,
Sure.
that's a nice little story. Team Australia made a little bit of noise. Obviously, Team Korea at Australia game was pretty good. Team Japan has just been continuing to kill it. There's a lot of fun action going on, and of course, obviously, you mentioned the Dominican Republic, who they're my natural rivals, but I mean, you want to talk about exciting. I mean, those guys live it up and it's great. Anyone that tells you that this tournament is not doing baseball justice, Bryce Harper, is crazy. This tournament is bringing such a positive light on baseball, and it just goes to show you that not only does baseball have such an impact on the diamond, but it's a culture thing too. I probably alluded to this before in the last podcast, but you're really seeing it come together now with just all of these nations just coming together, just kind of rallying behind their teams. I'm like, how would we have known about that picture from Czech Republic, or how would we have known how impactful the Italian team is doing for baseball, not only here for Italians, but also just like in Italy? I mean, you couldn't write a better script. This tournament has lived up to the expectations and then some.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned Puerto Rico, right? Like half the team couldn't play that they have stars, and somehow that they're able, like you said, a couple of great wins, one of those huge walk-off home runs. They advance out of their pool, obviously getting to play in Puerto Rico, which was awesome. As far as the Pool B is concerned, which the Americans were in, you mentioned it, man. I mean, that game the other night against the Italians, I mean, it was stunning. It wasn't as stunning for a couple of factors. One, once you realize that the manager of the USA team didn't know the rules, and why he did put out the lineup that he did, he could say whatever he wants. There was a miscommunication or he misread it, whatever. Clearly, him and his staff did not understand the rules and did not know. It looked like until at least the eighth inning of that game when Mark DeRosa was having Clayton Kershaw warm up, and someone had to tell him these runs count. You can't just put that guy out there and hopefully he's shut. And by guy I mean future Hall of Famer. I say that lightly, but someone who's now retired. This is going to be his last go around. It's just very embarrassing, and just it feels as though, listen, Team USA. I understand the personality wise, there's not a lot there. Considering the star power they have, but they have a stacked team, right? It's like the Monstars when you consider it. Just when you look at the lineup itself, up and down, it really is crazy. But on that side, or excuse me, on the other side of that coin, the game still has to be played. In a short tournament like this, I don't understand resting any player. I don't care if Harper wasn't swinging the bat well or not. He should be playing. I forget who else DeRosa bench, but there was a couple other guys that he sat, for rest, quote unquote, that should not have been resting. It's a short tournament. And the Italians have on the other, on the other side, I alluded to in the last podcast, sneaky good roster. Most of these guys are major league, you know, either major league players or major league level players with major league experience. And it seems like San Francisco Cervelli and his staff, they seem to really know what they're doing, from the top down there. And, the games still have to be played. And Italy's hitting a ton of home runs. They're very caffeinated with their Lavazza espressos. They're drinking a lot of it because they're knocking the ball out of the park. Their next game last night, they played against Mexico. Obviously, Pasquantino, you got to love it. He hits 3 home runs in the game and then tells the, post game says, USA, you're welcome. You're welcome for letting you guys back in the fold. And he wanted Bobby Witt's room key. A little more into that. They live together, I believe, either in spring training or in Kansas City when they're playing. So it's a little more into that. But it's great. They were so into it. Last night's game, I have a good friend of mine in Italy who plays baseball over there professionally. It was the first time. Last night's game between Italy and Mexico was the first time a baseball game, an Italian baseball game, was nationally televised in the country. So,
Wow.
Obviously they have their biggest win ever in Italian baseball history, beating the USA, and you would think there might be a letdown. And then they go up and they put another 8 they win 8-1 the next game. Aronola yesterday pitches 5 shutout innings. Michael Lorenzen the game before they get into the US, 4 1/3, 4 2/3 shutout innings. I mean, they got some guys. And everyone's playing hard and everyone seems to be really into it, but the US team. I don't know. I don't want to keep saying that. I don't want to keep ripping on them. But I guess it starts from the top down. I can't believe DeRosa admitted that they were hanging out in the clubhouse till 1, 2 in the morning. I get it's a tournament, and these guys are on the best players in the world, and they want to be around each other. Like I understand that, but you don't have to tell us. You definitely don't have to tell anybody about that. It's interesting. I don't want to again keep throwing USA under the bus, but I keep going back to DeRosa, the manager, and I remember, if you remember, before the 2020 season, he was one of the people the Mets interviewed. Sandy Olson interviewed to be the Mets manager. It was, him, it was Carlos Beltran, a couple other guys. We remember what happened. But one of the things that I know DeRosa has spoken about that Sandy Olson told him why he didn't get the job was he didn't seem like he wanted it that bad. Like he didn't live and breathe it. It would have been nice to do. But it didn't seem like it was something he was completely hungry for. And listen, he's great on television. We know he played a long time. He knows his stuff. He's great on MLB Network. But you would think over what's transpired now, forget if they win the whole thing or not. I would say he'd have to pull some, Sparky Anderson level managerial moves for people to kind of forget about this. But, in general now, for a guy that's been, the second time around doing this, which hasn't happened for USA managers in WBC historically, it's been one and done for all these guys. He's got a second chance to do it. It just seems like they're resting on their laurels a little too much in the back of baseball cards and thinking things will work out. And, at the end of the day, these, like I keep saying, these games have to be played. And, he thought he was fine for the job for this, right? But, in general, I thought before this, maybe eventually he'd be someone that would be in a major league dugout, be a major league manager, right? He seems to want to do that. I don't see that happening anytime soon now. I think his lane is MLB Network, and I would imagine his days as the USA manager are going to be over after this deal.
Yeah, so you kind of touched on a lot of what I was going to say, but just also too, the manager of your team is going to he has to be the leader of the clubhouse. When you look at, again, I'm going to reference USA Hockey. If you couldn't tell just from what's around me, I'm a big hockey guy.
Sure.
Team USA has Mike Sullivan. Mike Sullivan has won 2 Stanley Cups with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Mike Sullivan's a winner. What's the one thing that Mike Sullivan is known about? If you're a hockey fan, you know that Mike Sullivan gets the best out of his team regardless of how good or bad they are, which is why for a very long time, the Pittsburgh Penguins, while they weren't the greatest team, at least on paper, were able to ride. Obviously, it helps you have a guy like Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, what that, but this is not a hockey podcast. The point I'm trying to say is that Mike Sullivan got his guys to play, and they played hard. You look at the United States Olympic team from this year.
Mm-hmm.
It was I don't want to say they weren't skilled, but, there were some players that were left home that were skilled. But at the end of the day, you still had best on best, and Sullivan was able to get these guys to play. I don't see that with Mark DeRosa. Mark DeRosa, local kid, by the way, Seems like he's a very chill, down to earth guy. He's like your player's player. He's like he kind of seems like in this role he's better off as a coach, just like not as the main guy, because it is almost criminal to not understand the rules of a short tournament. Now, when Buck Showalter was the manager of the Mets, he preached to the team that they need to learn every nook and cranny of the rule book. And they went as far as to study those things during spring training. And they were very diligent on what type of rules were this, what type of rules were that. And it won them a couple of games in 2022. 2023 is a different story. But, Buck Showalter is an example of somebody who is a leader, right? Mark DeRosa doesn't show that. And I'm not trying to knock D-Row. I think D-Row is a great personality. He seems like a really nice guy. But if D-Row is not going, and I'm saying it like I know the guy, D-Row, but that's what they call him on the network. If Mark DeRosa is doing this in an international tournament that takes place over the span of 2 weeks, what makes you think that he's going to not carry that same attitude to potentially a major league team if someone were to inquire about him? There's a reason why, and you alluded to what Sandy Alderson said about him, is that why has he been passed up so much? He seems like a pretty affable guy. He seems pretty smart. From his analysis on MLB Network, you could make the case that he's a pretty well-rounded baseball mind. But what separates players from just being players to managers is sort of kind of how they implement that skill set to translate to a team. You could have the greatest player manage a team, and they can be awful at it. Again, I have to use the hockey comparison. You look at a guy like Wayne Gretzky, for example. Wayne Gretzky was the head coach of the Arizona Coyotes at the time, and he was terrible. Great hockey mind, one of the best hockey minds in the world, but those teams did not win. And so I think with DeRosa's personality kind of makes its way through the team, and then you have to also just look at the difference of the teams in terms of, what they're playing for. You look at what Sandy Alcantara said today, or when they asked him about his availability, he says he will start, he will relieve, he is here for Team DR. Vladimir Guerrero has echoed those same sentiments. Fernando Tatis, Juan Soto, anybody that's on Team Puerto Rico, anybody, Kike Hernandez, Edwin Diaz, all these guys say that they are playing for their country. Now, again, you want to talk cultural differences, fine. But at the end of the day, though, when you put on that uniform, whether you're Team Italy, you talk about those guys, it's Team USA, Team Puerto Rico, you should be proud. And part of that is being diligent and knowing what the tournament is, knowing the rules, getting your players amped up. People want to say, oh, well, it's just the major leaguers, they're so loaded. Yeah, but Dominican Republic has all major league players. They're all getting paid ridiculous amounts of money. Vinny Pasquantino, Jack Caglione, Aaron Nola, all those guys on Team Italy are getting paid major league salaries. Shohei Ohtani, Munetaka Murakami, Jung-Ho Lee on Korea, all those guys are getting paid major league salaries, and they're still playing hard. It all goes up to the leadership. There seems to be this sort of air of, I play in the major leagues, I don't have to do all this, I have a whole season to prepare for. That's not how you approach these small tournaments. And I'm sorry, I'm trying not to come off as judgmental, but it's sad to me as a baseball purist to a degree that you have the best on best, and this is how they treat it. Like it's nothing. You look at the 2017 team, just to name a couple of players, and I want to say a friend of the show, Jack Ramsey, kind of talked about it. You had Adam Jones and Marcus Stroman, of all people, basically putting themselves on the line for this tournament. That's why they won that year. That's why that team was not only good, but they were gritty. They gave Puerto Rico a hard time that year. And you know what? They won. They deserved it. You look at all those teams in the past with guys like David Wright, Jimmy Rollins, they may not have won it, but all of those teams were good. And again, to talk about different mindsets, David Wright took this tournament very seriously. Arguably, if you want to really look at the stats, David Wright's hitting over 400 with more than 10 RBIs in his time at the WBC.
Sure.
And then he had the Grand Slam against Italy. He had a bases loaded hit against Puerto Rico, scored 5 RBIs in 1 year. He really earned the title of Captain America. I'm not trying to flame Aaron Judge here, but Aaron Judge struck out in an opportunity with 2 runners on against Greg Weissert to essentially try to put Team USA ahead, and he just struck out. And I'm not trying to say that he didn't care, but there just seemed to be this sort of apathy towards it. And even though I am rooting for Team Puerto Rico, and I'm not really, I'm not saying I'm keen on Team USA, but I'd rather Puerto Rico win. If Team USA wins, great. But as a baseball fan, it really disheartens me to see this sort of lack of urgency, with this team, with Team USA. And again, I'm not really not trying to knock them, because they're still going to probably, they play Canada, and they're probably going to win, and they're probably going to make some noise, probably get themselves into discussion. But it's just, it's kind of sad to me to see that this is how some of the players treat the game of baseball. And I love baseball. You see all the hockey stuff in my room. Yeah, fine. But I love baseball. It's my first love. And I want to see it elevated to a point where, people say, wow, this is really a great game again. So they can come back into the national lexicon in just the culture and the discussion. But they're not doing us any favors. Look, Team Italy, Team Puerto Rico, Team Dominican Republic, Team Venezuela, all those countries, they can do as much as they can. But if you go to those countries, the game is nothing but the best. But I live in the United States, even though I am Puerto Rican. We all live in the United States, and we want to see baseball grow more, to what it was back in the day. And this is no slight to football here, but as much as I love the Jets, unfortunately, I think baseball's the better sport. So I want to see that being elevated by those who play here. And unfortunately, we're not getting that. And just to touch on Team Italy real quick, it was really nice to see that, they're not only are they taking it seriously, but there's just this sort of hunger, and I will also mention too that Jack Caglione can also play for Team Puerto Rico. So if he wants to pull a Nolan
Oh
Arenado
wow.
in the next 3 years, because his mother's Puerto Rican and he wants to come play for Team Puerto Rico, we'll be more than happy to bring him aboard. I'll get his jersey, whatever. But overall, though, a big dud by Team USA. But again, this tournament is just, I think, just absolutely phenomenal. And just to quickly touch on DeRosa, yeah, I think this tournament cost him a job. I think it did. If people weren't already doubtful as is, then I think he should just hitch his wagon to MLB Network and just kind of sail off into heading to Secaucus every day.
Yeah, I mean, you made a lot of good points. I think like the first one I think of now is like in comparison wise, Team DR, right? Talk about how loaded they are. There's nothing but MLB superstars on that team, how passionate they are, how hard they play. And you talk about, starting at the top, talk about different directions. I mean, for right now, it looks as though Albert Pujols will be in I would assume, a major league dugout at some point.
Same for Yadier
From
Molina from Team
from
Puerto Rico.
everything. Yes, absolutely. But Yachty's done this. He managed prior. Did he manage the 2023 as well? So he has a little experience with this.
He also
But
managed a lot in the Puerto Rican leagues too after he retired.
and that was another thing I was going to bring up with Poole. It just seems like Pujols is obviously, we know the cachet, we know what a player he was, right? First ballot Hall of Famer for me, one of the 5 best right-handed hitters of all time, at least that I've ever seen. I don't think there's any question there. But that doesn't always translate, right, to the dugout, to being a coach, to being a manager. But from everything that we're reading and everything that we're seeing, the reputation and the cachet has brought itself to that. He commands a room, he commands a team. I mean, you talk about a team full of superstars playing absolutely as hard as they can. They seem to be playing with, no restrictions, no blinders on, no blockers on, nothing. And Pujols seems to be really, really, made to do this as far as managing in these high level kind of games and tournaments. I know he's managed in the Dominican Winter Leagues as well over the last couple of years. I don't see any reason why a team in the near future wouldn't want to bring someone in like that to run their organization. You know what I mean? But just to put a kind of bow on what you're saying with all this too, you just see the passion from everyone else besides the U.S. And again, the U.S. team is stacked. I don't blame them. A guy like Skubal, you potentially have a $500 million on the line after the season. And cynically, my first thought was this guy almost was going to make another start for someone who doesn't know the rules. You're going to put a $500 million on the line for that? I can't fault them either. I think, but to that point, I guess Pujols seems to, the managing superstars thing doesn't seem to be an issue. Now, maybe because he was one of those himself, and these players, a lot of them grew up knowing him. They're probably, the Vladdy Juniors, the Tatises, he's almost got to be like Uncle Albert to them, in a way. So you would think that there's a respect factor there more for than DeRosa. It seems like he's just trying to keep all these superstars happy and coddle them and keep them smiling. And that's what seems to be more of the difference too. I know I saw Harper's comments about the Olympics. I mean, that's fine. I don't know if you looked it up. There's only about 6 to 8 teams that are competing in baseball in the Olympics in 2028. So compared to this field, this is a much more competitive tournament and field in that regard. Obviously, the eyeballs thing and the cachet that comes with the Olympics, I get all that. But as far as competitiveness in the tournament, I mean, how can you not ask that or, ask for more from this? The amount of countries that you have. Now, granted, you can make the case that, Italy is mostly guys from New Jersey. Maybe that's Italy West, but not exactly the boot as we'd say. But still, you have a couple of homegrown players there. So Francisco Zervelli, and this is something about, again, my buddy from Italy has told me about the last couple of years. He's been going around Italy on a bus, in a van, trying to scout talent only for this, but for the younger national teams and stuff, and try to grow the game. So there's, real love for the country and trying to bind the sport there. I guess, I don't know. I'm not a big Bryce Harper fan to begin with. I know my friends were very happy, Met fan friends, to get to root for Judge and Harper for once, but I kind of acted as if, and I will age myself, it's the hug from Step Brothers between the two brothers when they're kind of strangling each other and they punch each other and like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's how it kind of feels having a root for Aaron Judge and Bryce Harper. But we'll see. They got to listen. They have a second chance. They made it in thanks to Italy. Maybe they should buy them a nice dinner or something to thank them. But we'll see. Obviously it gets only tougher from here, being the quarterfinals. But like I said, this has been a lot of fun. In general, and the teams that you want to be there for the most part are going to be there. You're going to have your powerhouses, and you have some now great, stories for the tournament that are there as well. So I'm excited to see how Friday and the rest of the weekend turns out.
Yeah, and real quick before we transition into the Mets, I just want to point out to Bryce Harper that even if Team USA, first of all, like you mentioned, the Olympics are only 6 teams, so
is it 8 or is it only 6? I was saying.
Well, I heard it was
more
6, but it might be 6 to 8. But
wow,
when
either
it comes
way,
to the Olympics, right? So when you look at the way the Olympics are set up, right? It's usually in a centralized location, right? In this case, it would be in 28, it would be LA. And then not only that, but also you're limited to what you can really do. The uniqueness about the World Baseball Classic, outside of the fact that there's more than 6 teams, is that it's being played in different locations, right? Now, I'm sure in some instances in the Olympics, you can have, different venues, like, for example,
I believe
like Italy,
baseball is at Dodger Stadium.
yeah, it's only at Dodger Stadium, right? But there, you would have to really negotiate this, way beforehand. It's only at Dodger Stadium, but there's always a possibility of it potentially being different locations, like in Italy, like with the Winter Olympics, it was in Milan and Cortina because they're right next to each other. Possibly if there's an Olympics here in New York City, then you can have stuff in Lake Placid, upstate New York, but then also have it, in the area. Obviously, that's another conversation for another day. But again, just to kind of add to that, you're very limited with the World Baseball Classic. You have it in Puerto Rico. Sometimes it's been Dominican Republic. Sometimes it's been Venezuela or Mexico. But then, you also have it in Japan.
Right.
You have it in different locales. And then you obviously have Miami, which again is pretty Hispanic heavy. And then you have Houston too, which is also very Hispanic heavy, but there's a lot of cultures in those cities. So what you're watching on TV, especially in Miami, outside of Puerto Rico or when it was in Dominican Republic, is that not only do you have these teams playing in front of their fans, but it's also just a celebration of those cultures from those countries. You look at the Japanese in Japan, not only were, I'll say Taiwan, the correct is Chinese Taipei. The Taiwanese team filled the Tokyo Dome. The Korean fans filled the Tokyo Dome. Obviously, the Japanese fans filled the Tokyo Dome. Even some fans from like the Czech Republic and Australia
Sure.
filled the Tokyo Dome. And then obviously you look at the Hispanic countries, obviously Puerto Rico is a madhouse. Of course, I hate on Thorne Stadium. And then, so it becomes a celebration of cultures. I guarantee you, if the U.S. Olympics, which the NHL does have its own version of the World Baseball Classic
Right.
called
Right.
World
Right.
Cup of
Right.
Hockey that's coming that same year.
Yep.
Um, if the Olympics were to have done what the World Baseball Classic did and play it in different locales, you would get the same effect, where you would have teams like from Czechia and Italy and all that. They would come out and they would support their teams in their region, of course.
Right. Right.
So the diff with the Olympics, and then also for Bryce Harper, I don't think anyone's picking you for the U.S. Olympic baseball team, because by the time 2028 comes, he's going to be a little bit older. He's moving closer to 40. Nobody's picking you to play unless you're still hitting at least over 275. But you're just going to be primarily a DH. I'll just call Kyle Schwarber to do that because he'll do it better and he's a little bit younger.
Sure.
So
Sure.
I think the mistake that Harper is not understanding is that not only is he not going to be there, and if they do, I would be very surprised. It's the fact that it it'll be exciting, of course, because it is the Olympics. I'm not taking anything away from that, but the field is so small that it kind of sanitizes it a little bit. You can get away with it with hockey because hockey is a little bit more, I don't want to say niche, but you can have 6 teams and still have a competitive tournament. You can't do that with baseball, because then what's going to happen is you essentially eliminate Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic to a degree, and maybe some other teams like Australia, or some players for Team Italy won't be able to play because you won't have enough, and they have to play for Team USA. So it just kind of puts it in this small basket that it should not be in. Baseball is a very big sport, and it should be allowed to breathe, and that's what the World Baseball Classic does. You know, really think Bryce
Yeah.
Harper's
No.
gonna play for Team USA in 2 years? Come on, man! Like, I was born at night. I wasn't born last night. And there's
Yeah.
no slight to Bryce. I mean, he's a Major League Baseball player, and he's making more money, and he can do things that I can't do. Listen, I'm here, and I've got Lemonhead sitting next to me, and I just had pizza today. Bryce Harper's out there making millions of dollars. But if you're gonna be critical as someone who is in media, I have to criticize the things that he says. And dude, come on.
Yeah, listen, Harper's a future Hall of Famer. He was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. He was 15 years old. That I saw in the dentist's office when I was 15.
Mm.
So he's been doing it for a long time. He may be there in 2028. Who the hell knows? I'm not going to speculate there. I've already made my bones that baseball is going to do whatever they can to have the sport there, because they're not going to have a season in 27. But that's a whole nother thing.
Mhm.
We'll see. It's the cachet of the Olympic. It's the name. I understand the gold medal, all that sort of thing. But I agree, having 6 teams for a sport like baseball, where there are so many countries within Latin America and Asian America that are so competitive with this, it's hard to, say would, be more legitimate than a tournament like this. We'll see. But like I said, I'm just excited for the game starting Friday and then through the rest of the weekend, because this tournament's been awesome. But I kind of want to transition just a little bit to the Mets. That spring training is still going on. Couple things. Mets played today. Luis Robert made his Grapefruit League debut. He went 1 for 3 with a hit. From what everything that seemed, played well, was healthy, that sort of thing. That's all you want there. Sean Manaea pitched today, did not pitch well. I don't know what you're going to have there. I know we've talked about that in the past. But another guy, Marcus Semien, having a rough spring so far with the bat. New Met after the trade with Nimmo, that whole thing is not having a good spring so far. But Jorge Polanco had a home run today, which is nice to see. The Mets' new first baseman that never played first base before. I'll keep saying that until the season starts. But that's good. You like to see that happen. And in general, um, Francisco Lindor, I forgot about him. Sorry about that. I was looking through my notes. Playing defense on the backfield of games, swinging, taking some BP, but not ready to hit in games yet. But he is playing short on the backfield right now. And he spoke, we were talking before he spoke this morning. He still is optimistic about being on track for opening day. So, before we kind of close things up, just want to get your thoughts here on what's going on Mets camp so far.
So what's happening right now is really a product of kind of what David Stern's mission was, to add depth to this team. And first on Manaea, There are a lot of arms that can pitch on this team now, especially with the acquisition of Freddie Peralta. It is incredibly discouraging to see that Manaea is not up to snuff yet. He was originally, in my mind, going to be sort of like that, comeback story where he was going to
Hmm.
come back healthy this year, and he was, because he can hit 95, no problem, but he's, can't even touch 90. He was hitting 91 when he was coming back last season from his injury. So it's a little discouraging to see. Obviously, there's a lot more spring left, and they can work with him on what he needs to do. But me personally, I think the the arm injury that he has currently with the loose bodies and the bone spurs and whatever's going on in his elbow, I think he really seriously should consider surgery. Um, Obviously, I'm not him. I can't give medical advice because I'm not a doctor. But it seems as if whatever is bothering him and what was bothering him last season in terms of what was there and whatever was messed up in his elbow seems to be affecting him right now. There was the potential for surgery, but they decided to play through it. You know what? That's their choice. But at the end of the day, if it's not working out, the Mets still have options at starting pitching. And if you really want to kind of take it long with Manaea, you can put him in the bullpen or, kind of put him in a rehab assignment and see what he can do. I hope that he can bounce back because when Sean Manaea is on his game, he's one of the best pitchers, on in this team. But with the acquisition of Peralta, um, as well as having Nolan McLean come out, you know, with Senga, Peterson, Christian Scott coming back, and obviously Clay Holmes, being in the fold as well. This is a hit that they can absorb. Now, this was before. Now, if they hadn't gotten Peralta, now the question comes now whether you want to have Jonah Tong fill that spot or do you want to try out Jack Weniger, which I think is a little too far out there. You traded Brandon Sproat, obviously, so he's not an option anymore. So, but hopefully Manaea can bounce back and he can be the pitcher he was in 24. As far as Luis Robert Jr. goes, I'm very happy with the methodical approach that they're taking with him because the big issue, we've said it ad nauseum on the website on this podcast and just kind of, you know, overall in discussions about him is that, he's very injury prone. And I like that what the Mets are trying to do is strengthen his lower body so that he can take the grind of playing 162. And we know that when he can play a full season, he is a five-tool outfielder. He's not exactly Carlos Beltran, but he can definitely get you a very strong performance when he's healthy. So I like that he got a hit today, and I like that they were able to ease him in because if you really think about it, that's, granted, AJ Ewing is probably a couple of months to a year away. He's had a very strong spring, but you want to see him have that effort in AAA so that they can be confident enough to bring him up to the majors. So with that being said, with Luis Robert being a stopgap, you know, I don't want to say it's too much of a stopgap because if he plays well, then you could use him for another year or two, depending on how much they want to bring him back. Um, you know, you can't go wrong with it. So I'm happy that he got a hit today, and I'm happy that they're finally breaking a little bit of the restrictions in terms of what he's going to do, how he's going to play, and whatnot. So I like that. So it's a very encouraging sign from Luis Robert today. You mentioned Marcus Semien. I'm not worried about him. You know, um, I know there were a lot of people that were not too thrilled with that trade. Um, I think he's still playing really good defense. I think the bat will come, but also we're not relying on him to be a hitter. He still has some power in his bat. Um, but ultimately, at the end of the day, he's here for his defense. And if he's hitting seventh or eighth on this sort of team, that's what you want. And I think that, he'll come around eventually. He'll probably hit you 240, 250, get you at least 15 home runs, maybe 20, maybe hit a little bit more on the average side, depending on how healthy he is and whatnot. But I think with the defense, that is something that's going to come. And I think the bat will come as well. Not the same as it was before, but I think it will happen. Um, as far as Francisco Lindor, uh, great news that he's playing in the minor leagues on the backfield. Uh, for those who have never really had an injury to their hand, um, as an infielder, I hurt my hand a lot playing baseball, even though I'm no professional by any means. It's very difficult, especially when you're holding a bat, right? And the hamate bone is around this area
Hmm.
of the hand. So if you know anything about swinging a bat, if you've hit the ball nowhere near the barrel, and even if you do hit it hard and you hit it right below the barrel, the bat vibrates if you didn't know that. I'm not trying to talk down to anyone, I'm just trying to make a point. So imagine having that sort of loose bone there and having that vibration happen all the time, and then you have to get it, it's on a surgically repaired hand, having that happen all the time. The fact that he is already doing that and fielding and ramping up to hit, that's pretty good. Now, whether or not he's going to hit a bunch of home runs at the beginning of the season remains to be seen, but it's very encouraging that he's going to be coming back sooner than later. And it'll be nice to see him on opening day because, I'll be there, of course. And then as far as Polanco goes, I like what you say about that. The first baseman that's never played first base. I think that's very funny. What I like about Polanco is, and this is also tailored to players who have played other positions as well too. And you could actually talk about Vladimir Guerrero in this sense because he was a third baseman. They moved him over to first, and he's still very apt defensively, like he was at third base. I like that he's been able to embrace the role as someone who's played a middle infield position. You can see the athleticism. He's made a couple of nice scoops so far. And his bat's coming around, which obviously is probably one of the reasons why they got him. And, it's really nice to see that his bat is starting to come out and sort of fill that extra switch hitter role on the team. A lot of people don't understand how much of a commodity that is, because if you're talking about matchups later on in the game, early on in the game or whatever, you don't have to waste the body. You can have, if the lineup turns out properly.
Sure.
You have Lindor, and then you have even Ronnie Mauricio to a degree if he figures it out, and Jorge Polanco. You have 3 switch hitters on your team, so that allows you to preserve your bench, and that's another weapon for Carlos Mendoza and the crew. So I really like what I've seen from Polanco so far. I love that the power has gone up. He's trended up in power every single year over the last couple of years. His strikeout rate has gone down, and his fly ball rate has gone up. And I think once he gets that nice hit of wind at Citi Field, he's going to do damage. And I like what I'm seeing so far. This is a real positive for the Mets. And you're beginning to really see the plan that David Stearns has put together for this team. And it's really coming into fruition, whether it's good or bad. They have options and players are performing.
Yeah, I mean, we're 2 weeks from opening day today. Today is the 12th, so 2 weeks from now on the 26th, we're going to be playing baseball. So these guys, whether it's Robert or to whoever else, guys have to start getting ready and playing in games. So it's nice to see, like you said, Polanco's bat coming around, which is something the Mets are more, we're signing more than anything. He said he's made some nice picks at first. We'll see, as the season goes on, progressions. Keith will let us know probably better than anybody how he's doing over there, which I'm excited for. He'll keep it real for us on how Polanco's doing it first, and Vientos too, for that matter. So we'll see there. You mentioned real quick, we closed the show with this. You mentioned Carlos Beltran before, about center field. It was announced today that at some point this season, the Mets are going to be retiring his number. We'll close the show kind of with our thoughts on that. I am not a fan. For a couple of reasons. I mainly don't want to be the New York Yankees and retire every good player's number. I think players can be very good for a team, but not deserve to get their number retired. A few years ago on the show, we talked about who potentially could be next, and I threw his number out there after David Wright's, just because he was a really good player. Not necessarily that I think it's deserved. He was a great player when he played for the Mets. I would argue 5.5 years is not long enough to get your number retired. Then I probably could say that maybe Keith Hernandez shouldn't have gotten his number retired, but Keith Hernandez was a captain, won a World Series. Carlos Beltran obviously made the postseason one time with the Mets, and unfortunately is remembered for one pitch that ended that whole run. And I just don't think he had a big enough moments. He's not a homegrown player. I personally felt that it would be David Wright's number getting retired. And then after that would be Jacob deGrom for me. I just feel like what he did in a Mets uniform, being a homegrown player, being the best player on the planet at that time, having, for me, a couple of the best pitching seasons in the history of baseball, kind of would be more deserving. And to me, that's down the line. Obviously, that would be years down the line. I'm surprised either way that this is happening so fast. It might be because they're a little worried about the team maybe not doing so well, and they want to make sure they can sell some tickets this year. I don't know, but I imagine you're going to have a little bit of a different opinion than me, which is cool. But I'm curious what you think about number 15 getting retired some point in 2026.
I will, of course, respectfully disagree, as the Puerto Rico jersey over my left shoulder would tell you, but also the poster I still have of him on my
Sure.
wall here as Carlos Beltran, because apparently I'm still 12 years old. If we're going to hold them to that standard, at least with the homegrown part, then Keith Hernandez and Mike Piazza shouldn't have their numbers retired. If we're going to do that, then if that's the case, I think, and even though they were Mets a little bit longer, and especially Piazza, Keith won a World Series here.
And Piazza
I think
carried them to a World Series.
carried them to the
The best
pennant in
player in his
2000.
position for a period of
Absolutely.
time with that team, was the best player on the team, that sort of thing.
Right. But let's make no bones here. Carlos Beltran is probably this franchise's greatest outfielder. Numbers
Sure.
wise, but also, statistically speaking, he put up a lot of he put up a lot of good numbers here, right? And I think also too, when it just comes to just being a Hall of Famer, I think at least optics wise, it wouldn't look good for a franchise who he went out of his way to put them on his plaque to not have them retire his number. It was probably if he wasn't the Hall of Famer and he didn't get inducted and he ran out of eligibility and he didn't get into the Hall of Fame, then I can understand that to a degree. But, Piazza's in the Hall of Fame, with the exception of Darryl and Doc, who, obviously they won here, so that's your standard. Keith Hernandez should be in the Hall of Fame. Tom Seaver's in the Hall of Fame. Kuzman won a title here. There seems to be everyone that's had their number retired has hit like a benchmark, with the exception of David Wright. But David Wright was also homegrown and was beloved by this franchise, so you understand why he did it. With David Wright, there was a lot of potential that we saw, and he was, the homegrown guy, this and that and the fourth. So I guess that kind of falls over to Beltran
Captain
too.
of the team. Keith Hernandez was
Captain of the team,
too.
right? Of course. But with Beltran, he was very quiet, but he was still a presence. Every single team from at least 2005 up until at least 2000, until he left, he was always a presence. And yeah,
Sure.
I mean, he may not have been the flashiest, he may not have been the most grandiose player in the world, but you knew whenever Carlos Beltran took the field when he was healthy, he was going to give you his all, right? And when it comes to Hall of Fame, sentimental value does play a lot into this as well. He's up there in team numbers, team records. I mean, the guy held the home run record before Pete Alonso broke it in 2019. So he's no slouch. His defense spoke for itself. His bat spoke for itself. He's a switch hitter. It's just unfortunate that they couldn't do much. But all in all, his play is what ultimately got him into the Hall of Fame. And I think his number, at least even more than, this is going to sound crazy, I don't want to say more than Keith or Gooden, but he's up there. He really is. And I think the Hall of Fame kind of solidified that. Maybe it doesn't sound like I'm making a good case for the guy, but he was here, the numbers are there, he was very impactful. He was a big part of this team. 5-6 years, that's still a pretty decent amount of time for someone to have an impact on a team. So I make that same argument with also making the argument that David Wright should also be in the Hall of Fame. And again, I'll touch on hockey real quick, as we're going to wrap up soon. But you look at a guy like Eric Lindros. Now, Eric Lindros in the NHL, he's hit some milestones, but he never won a Stanley Cup. He had some big moments in some playoffs, but Eric Lindros was regarded as arguably one of the greatest power forwards in the NHL. He had a sort of an incomplete career because of injury. So in that regard, I think David Wright should also be held to the same standard too, because even in that small period of time that David Wright was an active ball player, his numbers echo very similarly to Scott Rowland. So, David Wright should be in the Hall of Fame just like Carlos Beltran is in the Hall of Fame. In the Hall of Fame with the 300 home runs and the 1,000+ RBIs and you name it, it's only fitting for them to retire. And he was also an ambassador for the team. As much as, he made the comment about the previous ownership not really, caring for him. Even through all that, he was still an ambassador for this team. Numerous All-Star games, a bunch of Gold Gloves, Silver Sluggers. I mean, he was no slouch. And even though he didn't finish his career as a Met and he wasn't a homegrown Met, um, the impact of him being on this team from '05 to 2011 is understandable, and people have a lot of fond memories of Beltran, myself included. So I think that kind of says a lot, and I think this is also Cohen trying to do right by a lot of the alumni as well. And I think Carlos deserves it. I think he does.
Yeah, I know. He was a great player when he was here. I'm not saying that. Just wish he was here longer. That might have helped. No doubt that he's not. I mean, him and Andrew Jones, two best center fielders of his generation. So I think I've said he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. If he didn't have the cheating thing, it would have been different. I just don't necessarily believe if you're a Hall of Famer, you should be automatically have your number retired. It just if he was here longer and there was more memorable moments, I would be a little more apt. I also can't put David Wright in the Hall of Fame. I've said that before. He's an MVP in a World Series away from that happening, but because injuries, his peak just wasn't long enough. He falls into that, for me, Don Mattingly kind of category, and Mattingly was probably a better player than Wright anyway. Mattingly, I believe, as an MVP over David Wright. But, great homegrown player, captain of the team. He played here for 15 years or 18 years, whatever, 15 years, whatever it was. So I don't know. We'll see. Beltran was definitely a good player. I know there was weird stuff with injuries that, like, he had surgery that the Mets didn't necessarily want him to do. So it was that kind of always weird underlying thing. I know Beltran said basically if the new ownership wasn't here, he probably wouldn't be putting the Mets on his cap. He would be just going in with no team. But he said that, Alex and Steve over these last few years have really made an impact on him and how he's felt about the organization or whatever. So I guess that has something to do with it too. But we'll see. I just hope that this doesn't mean that the Mets will be bad and they want to sell some extra tickets. So we'll see. Hopefully,
well, they're always gonna want us to buy tickets,
That's
but
for
I guess
sure. That's for sure.
I guess
Hopefully they're good,
that's
and
yeah, it's part of the
it's
whole
sold
thing.
out for that. Then whatever. I just don't want it to
Mhm.
be. This is the one sold out game in July because the Mets already have it or something like that. But we'll see.
Fingers
But
crossed.
2 weeks right before all that happens, we got some great WBC, baseball to finish up over the next week or so here. So, between, all that, we'll keep you updated. And as always, everybody, let's go Mets.